What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Alex here from Team Generations, and today we're here with Alec Goff over here from Long Island, Team Alchemy. Came in second place premium overall, so super excited to have you guys on the channel. Like I said before, if you haven't caught the other ones already, we are starting to post their profiles, so very excited for that overall. So Alec, before we start, any opening thoughts, anything you want to kind of say?
Yeah, so like Alex said, my name is Alec. We got second. I brought Eradicators today. Personal record was 7-2. I was very iffy going into the tournament on bringing Eradicators. I was thinking about a few other options, namely the other two Narukami decks being Vanquisher and Dungry. I also was thinking about the idea of Maelstrom Link Joker, but I ended up going with Eradicators for the disruption tools it has and just the interruption that it has against the opponent, and gotta say it worked out very well. So
awesome.
Let's get into the deck profile.
Cool. Happy to get into it. Let's do it now. All right, so hopping right into the profile.
All right, so we're going to start off with the Grade 0, the starter. This is Eradicator Springlight Draco Kid. You know, it's regular V starter. But this is, as I like to call him, the Goopy Boy. We've got a lot of feelings about him. A lot of people call him the worst, the ugliest starter in V. I like him. I think he's a funny little boy. He's a little goopy. I think he's a mandatory include. You know, you have to run him.
There we go. Throwing cards you throw out of your hand too. Didn't catch that, but.
Moving on from that, we've got start with the triggers. We've got very standard lineup, just 4 draw PG, 4 heal guards, 3 of the GB crit, and 4 of the stride crit, and the 1 over trigger. Some people run the Grade 0 Eradicator heal because they can search it off the Nusku, but we're running the Grade 3 searcher, so there's no reason not to run the heal guards. They're just better because we can also check top 5 for them, and other than that, very standard trigger ratios. Getting into the Grade 1s, we have Eradicator Demolition Dragon. This was one of the best cards all day. Just the on-hit draw provided a lot of pressure, and the targeted bind from drop zone comes up in a lot of decks like Grand Blue and Order Colony to find their key pieces or the books, and just overall contributed a lot to my wins today. Then we will go to Eradicator Nusku. This is on place Vanguard and Rearguard. It checks the top 5 for any Eradicator, and then if you add the discard, so it's like a Grade 3 searcher, but for any Eradicators, so you can find your Demo Dragons or just anything else in the deck. And it's just really good, especially if you ride it, and even if you're going second, you can get the Quick Shield, and then immediately this Quick Shield for any piece that you need that you can find. So just overall, really good toolbox to find what you need. And then finally for the Grade 1s, which run 3 of the Grade 3 searcher, it's a 13k booster, and also you can grab your Grade 3s, which helps secure a ride, helps secure the Descendants for the re-ride and other cards, and can even most importantly add the Grade 3 heals because the G-Guards are one of the strongest parts of this deck. Then moving on to the Grade 2s, we ran 4 of the Eradicator Spark Raise Dragon. This is the best ride. On place, it gets +5, and you get the same top 5 check as Nusku if you add your discard, so it helps with the Grade 2 game a lot, and especially against force decks. You know, you hit numbers without needing to commit a booster, and it's another on-hit and you draw a card, so with the 8 on-hit draws, you just provide a ton of pressure, and you know, when you want to stun versus the opponent, it really pressures them because they're either taking the damage, which they'll need CB for, and in which case they're giving you cards, or they're guarding, which is putting cards in the drop zone for the stun versus to bind later on. So it's really just a win-win scenario. You either take cards out of their hand and then get Sunverse, which takes more cards later, or you're pushing them for damage and you're drawing cards. Just overall an absolute win-win. And then we are running 4 of the Choo. This is one of the biggest ways to make pressure in this deck because it restands, and you can give it a lot of power just off the Vowing Sword effect after using it with Sunverse, so this will often be swinging for 30, 40, 50k sometimes or more, and just then restands. You can put any triggers on it, put any crits, and just overall is a great way to just push for damage. Then, on more the defensive side, we ran 3 Cohen Shack and the 4 Unruly Dragon. This is our way to interrupt, so the Unrulies can pop anything on the board when it intercepts, except for attackers' boosters. And the Cohen Shack, when something is popped on the opponent's field, both players pop something. So this was one of the best cards. Again, just being able to disrupt the opponent, and even if I wasn't using the effect, the opponent still had to respect the card by either swinging into it or just trying to play around it. And if they didn't, then I could just end their turn. The Cohen Shack goes really well with this and some of the G-Guards to just help get more cards out of the field to stop their turn. And just overall being able to stop the opponent's turn with cards like these and the G-Guards is just one of the strongest points of this deck. Then moving on to the grade 3s, we have 4 of the Vowing Sword Dragon. This is usually the main ride. This is the 4 of. When you use the Stunverse Dragon and bind a lot of the cards from the opponent, the opponent can choose to bind a card from the deck with the same name for each normal unit bound, and if they do, I give something plus 5,000 power, and if not, I give something plus 10. So you're often binding 4 or 5, sometimes even like 8 or 9 cards with the Stunverse. So that'll trigger for each one of this will trigger for each one of those. Just give a ton of power to the board and apply a ton of pressure. And then also, an effect that doesn't come up super often, but can be very clutch is when it's ridden over, it calls itself out, and you get to bind cards from the opponent's drop zone. And this is, aside from Demolition Dragon, the only other targeted drop zone bind, which comes in really useful against, again, like Grand Blue or Border Colony, against just anything that needs specific pieces in the bind zone. So just overall really good to get pieces away from the opponent. And then we're running 2 of the Dragonic Descendant. This can copy the skills of the other thing, such as the Vowing Sword, and it retains them even when you stride over it. So if you Stunverse over this and then remove it, this will still keep the skills. So you can then give this a lot of power and the Choo a lot of power, whatever's on board. And if he does not hit, you can restand, so you can give a lot of power off the Vowing Sword effect to the restanding Vanguard. And just overall puts in a lot of pressure. And the final card was one of the Eradicated Gauntlet Buster Dragon. This card was amazing all day. It's only a 1 of, but I kept seeing it, and it's like, it made me want to ride up, even if like most decks would play the grade 2 game, because it just forced a PG or forced cards, and the opponent wasn't prepared for it. Sometimes they would just like outright take 3 damage. And then again, if I'm sitting on this, then I can copy it with the Descendant, have a restanding Vanguard that's 3 or more damage and hitting big numbers. So just overall, this card was incredible. The second effect also doesn't come up super often, because the opponent usually doesn't call much early, and you don't want to commit the CB or the hand, but if you do, it's just more early bind if you ride up to filter and get more off the first Stunverse that you stride into.
Also, so that is the main deck, and now let's hop into the G-Zone.
Alright, so for the G-Zone, we have to start off with the best card in the G-Zone, one of the best strides in the game right now. This is Stunverse Dragon. It just removes itself from the Vanguard, so you still get your Vanguard effect, and it just binds basically your opponent's entire board and 4 from the drop zone. And then you just draw cards and rip a bunch of cards out of the opponent's hand. And it just scales incredibly well. Once you get to the second Stunverse, that will usually just end the game. If not, you can go into the third, or just go into one of the finishing strides, and it just rips a ton of cards out of the opponent's hand. People hate this card with a burning passion. They do not like cards getting ripped out of their hand, but hey, it does its job. It's incredible. Then we run what I like to call Flip Fodder for Stunverse. Now this is a V-Buster. It I think it binds 1 from field and drop. I honestly don't know what it does. It's a Vanquisher name that you flip up, which is relevant for the VMAX stride because it lets you attack multiple units. But other than that, it is essentially just Flip Fodder for the Stunverse. Then we're running the Progenitor Gilgal. It's a decent option if the opponent plays around the Stunverse, just because they're not going to use the effect, but just getting the free strides for the rest of the game can be useful for maintaining card advantage, and you don't really have much better right now to go into if the opponent just like doesn't give you a lot for the Stunverse. But I never actually ended up going into this during this tournament, just because with all those on hits and the pressure, especially in the grade 2 games, I would just force cards out of the opponent's hand and onto the field and the drop zone. So the first Stunverse was always at least getting one card in my hand and one out of theirs, so very impactful. Then going to VMAX, probably my favorite finisher in this deck after today. Went into this the most. It's just if the opponent is at 5, you're scared of the overtrigger. They don't have a field, you just ping them at damage no matter what they're at. So you go into this, you have your entire field attacking. If they heal, if they overtrigger, doesn't matter. You counterblast 2, deal them at damage. So came in, I think I went into this the majority of my games, I think only actually using the effect once because it was just like the game would end before then, but just overall an incredible finisher. And the second effect that lets it attack rears as well as the Vanguard for each face-up Vanquisher and Z-Zone, so you'll usually flip out the 2 V-Busters with the Stunverses, and because you can attack 3 units, so if they somehow still have units on board, this can just make sure they get rid of them, so you can use the second effect, or the first effect for the ping. Then you can go into Voltage, another finisher, gives your entire front row plus 3,000 for each card in the bind zone. So you know, if you're trying to end the game, you Stunverse, your opponent has a lot of cards in the bind zone, this makes your entire front row huge. You can put that applies to the Choos as well, which will restand, and just everything can get absolutely massive. Finally, for the strides, running the GB8, so it's a similar function as the Voltage, just later on. And it also just binds the entire drop zone of the opponent, so no matter what they have at any point in the game, this will just make the bind zone huge, and it gives all units plus 2,000 for each card in all players' bind zones. So again, it just makes everything absolutely massive. And that is the last for the strides. And going into the G units, this is one of the most impactful parts of this deck. It's running the triple Impede Dragon. 3 of this is the GB1. Your opponent chooses one of the cards on their field, retires and binds it, and then if they have 2 more units than you, they choose another and retire it. The first effect, the fact that it retires and binds, is very important because it triggers the Cohen Shack, which is only when a card is put into the drop zone, so the fact that it retires and then binds comes up a lot. And just the reason we want to run 3 is, despite like it being a GB1 and flipping something up, is just if you have 3 heals in hand, this can sometimes just end the opponent's turn by going triple Impede. I did that in my top 4 match against Revengers. I just Impede, get rid of their whole field, and then PG the Vanguard so I don't get over-triggered, and they just pass turn because they have nothing. Then one of the other ones we run is Bullwork. It's a 25 shield at Defender Strike 3 if the opponent has 3 or more in bind, so that can come up as just a big shield. And then the second effect is relevant for some decks, that it can pop the rested front row for every 4 card in the bind zone. So this never actually came up for me today, but it's still a very good card just for more tools, more options for disruption, more options for stopping the opponent, and just overall being just a good tool for whatever you want it to do. The final G-Guard was Dismal. This card is really good. It can protect the unruly dragons, so if your other G-Guards, like if you're not at GB1 and the Impede won't be able to use and you don't have bind, so the Bullwork doesn't have any effect and you just want to be able to G-Guard, this is really good to protect the unruly, to make sure you still have disruption, so the opponent can try attacking into it and you just Dismal and they can't do anything about it, and then you get to intercept with it and just pop the opponent's board. So it's overall really just amazing card.
Cool. Awesome. So that is both the G-Zone and the main deck over here. We're going to just back up over here and get into kind of like match breakdowns, things of that nature. All right, cool. Let's hop right into some of the matchups. Whichever ones you want to go over. If you want to go over just the top of it, so, whatever you want to do.
Like I said, the earlier final record was 7-2. Just I'll go over the 2 losses quickly. One of them was against Gurgit, it was basically just the V build. He never actually strode, but you know, just with 4 Percival, just getting the 4 excels plus 20 to the front, I just couldn't really do much against it. And then after that was rounds 4 and 5 actually went against Daihozan and Order Colony. In both those games I just had a lot of control over the game. I was able to bind the book in Order Colony really early, and for Daihozan, when the opponent Shiranui reneged me, I called an Unruly Dragon to the front row, so after it was done attacking, when they entered their battle phase, I could just intercept with it and stop their turn. And then round 6 was my other loss to Revengers, where it's actually my fault. I misplayed, and that was just really brutal because I used a G-guard instead of guarding with my other options, and that meant I couldn't stride because I didn't have the grade 3. But other than that, it was a really close match. I was able to stop some of his earlier turns, and just unfortunately that match ended with a loss because of misplay. Then in top 8, I ended up winning all 3. Top 8, I played against Grand Blue. He started to just play into the binds a lot because he had a bell, but then once he used the bell once, that brought all the cards back. He couldn't bounce it back to hand with a Greed Shade or something, so I just got bound to it, and from there I just kind of took control of the game. In my top 4, I played against Revengers again, a different Revenger player, and I slept with the other one. I had control thanks to the disruption tools. I had a lot of perfect guards. There was on one of his turns I used the Impede Dragon 3 times and shut down his turn, and then perfect guarded to play around the over trigger just in case, and was from there able to just clutch out the game. And then in finals, I went against Neo Nectar Musketeers. That was interesting. Their tokens don't count towards the bind zone when you bind them because they just go away, so that sort of contributed to a bit less of it, but I was able to just bind their field every turn, bind a lot from the drop zone, get more with the on hits and stuff, so I hit over the thresholds even if they didn't have 4 on field, and just overall clutch out the game with stun verses. I believe I ended that game by going into the 3rd stun verse. He had 3 cards in hand, he had 20 in the bind zone, so I drew 5 more cards and he bound all 3 cards in his hand, and from there it was just, the over trigger was gone already, so we just swung for game, and that was the most important matchups, yeah.
Awesome. Is there any major changes you would make to the deck, you think?
Honestly, no. I think the changes, the deck list was perfect as is. I was toying around with Zwitan before that, just because with the 1 Gauntlet Buster gets in power and just it's more guaranteed draw because it goes into soul at the end of battle. Some people run the grade 1 PG, the Eradicator one. I just didn't have room for that. Also, I just didn't own it. But it's good for searching off Nusku, but I never felt the need for it, honestly, at any point. So it's fine as is, and I just think the list was really good, and it's performed as perfectly as I wanted it to.
Any closing thoughts, any shout outs you want to give?
Just shout out to my teammates, couldn't have made it this far without either of them. Just really overall solid team composition, good playing all day, despite any luck factors that accounted for the games, and just, yeah.
Solid time overall. Awesome.
Yeah.
2nd place is definitely nothing to scoff at. Congratulations again. I'm so happy for you guys. And yeah, Long Island Cardfight, super strong. And shouts out Dawson too.
Yeah, shout out to Dawson.
Go follow them on Twitter. Link everything down below. Team Alchemy. I'm not sure if you guys have a YouTube or anything like that, but if so, I'll post that too. But again, thank you guys so much for watching. This is Alex from Team Generations signing out.